everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to MusicForever, where today we're reviewing Metallica's newest studio album, Hardwired to Self Destruct. Alright folks, before we get into this actual review here today, I just want to remind anyone who may be new to my channel that I am reviewing all of Metallica's albums here on my channel, and there's a playlist linked in the description, as well as going to be on screen here at the end of the video that you can click on. It'll take you to the playlist, and it has all my Metallica related content in that playlist, so you can check that out when you're done watching this video if you want to see my opinions on Metallica's other albums, for example. I definitely recommend you do that, so, after the video, check that out. But, let's start talking about Hardwired to Self Destruct right now. The newest Metallica album that's been released, and so it makes the last album review in my Metallica discography review video series, I guess you could say. So, we've come a long way pretty much. So we're talking about the newest Metallica album, Hardwired to Self Destruct, which just came out last year in November, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Hardwired to Self Destruct. The wait for this album, it was something pretty much. Between Death Magnetic, that was released in 2008, and then this album released in 2016, it was the longest gap really between Metallica studio albums, and there was a lot of, time in between there for people to kind of, get excited for a new Metallica project, kind of lose that excitement, and, even question whether or not we were going to be getting one ever again, because, Metallica, given how big they are, if they just decided to tour a bunch, they could probably make enough money to, they never need to release another album again, pretty much. But, fortunately we did get another album, and, it was the first Metallica studio album released while I was, a fan of this group. I became a fan, sometime earlier this decade, I guess you could say. I don't remember exactly what year it was. I think it was, 2011 or so. But, so it was a significant amount of time after Death Magnetic was released, but still, it was a long way even from when I became a fan until when this album was released. So I was really excited to see what Metallica were going to do here. And also a bit scared because, given how Metallica in recent years have kind of been a bit, hit or miss with some of their projects, I was kind of concerned that they weren't exactly going to be able to, have a hit with this one. Though I did like Death Magnetic, like I said in my review of that album, so, I had high hopes that maybe they'd be able to follow it up with something that's, a logical progression of that album. However, given the long time between both albums, I was still somewhat scared that, whatever progress they had made with Death Magnetic improving on Saint Anger didn't really mean much of anything by at this point. This was pretty much just going to be a whole new thing here, and we were just going to have to accept it for really what it was. Another kind of interesting thing about Hardwired to Self Destruct is that it's Metallica's first double album, or at least their first one made of new studio content, really, because, Garage Incorporated, the cover album they released, was technically a double album. However, it was all covers, and the second disc of that was previously released material. So, I really don't count that as being their first double album, though technically it was. This is the first double album of, new content. It's a full album's worth of content. And kind of a funny thing about it is you'd think it'd be the longest Metallica album given that it's the double album, but it's not. Load is actually longer than this album in terms of runtime, which I found to be kind of, jarring. I've been saying in my recent Metallica review videos that the biggest problem with Metallica's newer albums is that they're too long and they just drag on a bit more than they need to. And, you could definitely even see that talking about Load now, given that the double album that Metallica would put out was less, it had a less shorter runtime than that album, which is kind of ridiculous. But even still, I think the fact that it's a double album here really helps this album in that regard because while I've, complained about Metallica's albums being a bit too long in recent years a lot in some of my previous reviews, here that because it's a double album, I kind of expect it to be longer. And, when it's divided into two halves, it's a lot easier to just listen to, one half and then come back for the second half later or something like that. You don't feel, inclined to listen to it all the way through unless you really want to. Which is kind of a good thing when it comes to this album, because like I said, the length time is a bit on the longer side, I guess you could say, for a Metallica project. But what about the music itself, pretty much? I've been talking about the length between albums and, what exactly we have here in terms of runtime that is, but what about the music itself? Is it any good? And the answer to that question is simply, yes, I think Hardwired to Self Destruct is a good album, pretty much. Let's start with the first track. Let's start with the first half of this project, the first disc. Now the first disc here is pretty much, in my opinion, some of the best material that we've gotten from Metallica in a good while. Now, each of these two halves of the project are about the length of around 40 minutes or so. I believe the first disc is slightly shorter than that, but, they're not particularly long in that regard, and I kind of enjoy that. They're nice kind of shorter listens, which is enjoyable given that we have had a lot of really long Metallica albums recently. And the first disc that we have here, like I said, really solid in my opinion. It starts off with the track Hardwired, which was the first single that we actually got from this album. Now, initially going into this song when it was first released as a single, I was, of course, nervous. But upon hearing it, it was kind of a natural kind of continuation of Death Magnetic in terms of the thrashy sound. But this track, of course, being a lot shorter. This track is only like 3 minutes long. It's definitely a shorter, really kind of like thrashy song that kind of puts you in the mood to kind of like destroy something or something like that. It's definitely a lot of fun. Not one of my favorites here on this disc, but it still is a really good song, and it's one that, when I heard it, it kind of assured me that this album is actually going to be good at least. It was at least going to be a good, enjoyable project. The next track, however, Atlas Rise, is definitely an improvement. I like how the lyrics here have to do more with mythology, a lot more interesting stuff here, and I just like the whole, kind of uplifting sort of sound that the song has going for it. It's rather enjoyable. I also like the kind of darker, sort of heavier feel of tracks like Dream No More or Now That We're Dead. I like especially Now That We're Dead how it starts off with kind of this kind of angrier sounding, darker, just kind of sounding riff that's, goes on for the song. And of course the track Dream No More, kind of once again returning to that whole concept that Metallica tackled before with like Cthulhu and stuff. Of course they had the track Call of Cthulhu from their album Ride the Lightning, and of course people are going to make fun of how James Hetfield, he sings his name Cthulhu, he pronounces the T with kind of like a hard sound, which typically isn't how people pronounce the name. Usually people pronounce it, as I said before, Cthulhu, but I really don't care, to be honest. I like how Metallica kind of continue on with similar lyrical themes that they've tackled before on previous albums, just kind of bringing a new spin to them. And, we get to hear them talk about Cthulhu, or Cthulhu rather, in a track that's not an instrumental, which is, of course, enjoyable. And then we have the track Moth into Flame, which is another one of the singles from the album. And it's just another rather solid single here that you would expect. A bit more melodic than a track like Atlas Rise or especially Hardwired, but it still is a really enjoyable single. And then the closing track for this first half, Halo on Fire, is also kind of a bit of an enjoyable song, a longer song, and it's just a nice way to end off this half of the album, I guess you could say. It definitely does feel like a closing track here in that regard. And I do like how they made both of these two halves of Hardwired to Self Destruct kind of their own individual things with their own beginnings and their own kind of ending tracks to them. It doesn't feel like it's meant to be like one album that you listen to all the way through, though that's perfectly a fine way to listen to it. I definitely feel like if you wanted to listen to like half of Hardwired and you just want to listen to the first disc or the second disc, that would be perfectly fine. And Halo on Fire is just a nice closing track here for the first half. And I just think overall the first half of this project is a lot stronger than the second half, because the second half really, I heard somewhere when this album was released, or sometime after the album was released, that the first disc here was supposed to be more typical kind of thrashy Metallica, whereas the second disc was supposed to be a bit more experimental. And I'm not 100% sure if that's true or not, especially given that, listening to the second disc here, it doesn't really seem all that experimental compared to the first disc even here that were presented. It just kind of feels more like thrashy Metallica. The only difference I kind of note is that there are a bit of some slower moments or parts where the songs have slower passages in them, for example, but it's really no different than anything that you would have seen on tracks like The Day That Never Comes or The Unforgiven 3 on Death Magnetic, for example, or even tracks that go farther back like One or Fade to Black, for example. I'd say those tracks are far more, I guess you could say, different and experimental, if you will, than anything that's on the second disc. Overall, the second disc starts off with the track Confusion, which is another kind of a more aggressive-leaning track, also enjoyable. And the thing is about the second disc, it's that none of the songs are bad per se. They're all enjoyable in their own way, but just compared to some of the tracks on the first disc, I can't help feeling that it's somewhat lacking, and that these are some of the more, I guess you could say, filler-like tracks here. But we do get a good track here at the end, Spit Out the Bone, which is arguably my favorite track out of both of these two discs that we get here. It's just a really kind of aggressive, thrashy Metallica song that feels like something that they would have put out in the 80s. But it doesn't have to be super short in length like Hardwired, the opening track here. This track is one of the longer ones, and it just feels like something that would have fit on one of their older albums with maybe like a slightly worse production than it has here. It would have fit in perfectly with those albums. And I think it's a strong way to end out this project, in my opinion. Now, that also kind of raises the question that could this project be shortened down a bit more? And I think the answer to that is yes, really. If we had taken the first disc here and maybe just add Spit Out the Bone in there, the album would have been an acceptable length to be, released as a full album, and it would have been a lot stronger and more concise, in my opinion. However, that's not, once again, I'm not saying that the rest of the tracks on the second disc aren't bad or enjoyable or anything like that. They certainly are, just that they're not super standout compared to some of the tracks that appear on the first half, or, Spit Out the Bone, which is just a really standout song, in my opinion. Definitely the highlight here. We also have the track Murder One here in the second disc, which is a tribute to Lemmy of Motorhead, who passed away in December of 2015, this December before this album was released. And it's a nice little tribute, I guess you could say. It's not something that really screams tribute to me when I listen to it. The first time I heard it, I didn't even know that it was a tribute to him, and I never actually picked up on that. With listening to it, I had to actually find that out through, research later on. But, it's serviceable. And just another thing is that some of the tracks on the second half just have names that I think are kind of strange, like Man Unkind, Really Guys, Really, or Am I Savage, Really Guys? Is that what you named the track on your album? Here Comes Revenge, really? And that album artwork also, what is going on there, in my opinion? It's like the awful bootleg version of Autopsy's Mental Funeral, and I thought it was a joke the first time I saw it, but no, it's real. I do like the logo on it though, to be honest. That part's cool. But yeah, you really shouldn't judge a book by its cover, however, because the album that we're given here is a lot better than the artwork would kind of lead you on to believe. Hardwired, despite some of the flaws in terms of the second disc not being quite as good as the first one, or just a bit more, I guess you could say, redundant compared to the first one, those are small problems in the grand scheme of things, especially when you're not really required to listen to this thing all the way through like you were with previous Metallica albums that had filler with them. You can kind of listen to disc 1 and then, take a little break, listen to disc 2, and not really feel bad about having to pause the album or kind of complain about that, because it was made to be kind of two little separate things combined under this greater, I guess you could say, grouping of Hardwired to Self Destruct. And both parts of this album do definitely kind of fit together. They both sound similar, but that could also be considered a bad thing, considering, like I said, I heard that the second disc was supposed to be more experimental, which I really don't see. But, it's a solid project overall, I'd have to say. And I think it's the best Metallica album that we've really gotten since the Black Album, which, is a long time between the release of that album and this one, over almost 30 years, pretty much. So, it's rather impressive given that. And I think it has some of the most solid Metallica songs that we've really seen in a good while, like Spit Out the Bone, Atlas Rise, or, Dream No More. That's another one of my favorites. Those three tracks are just some of the ones on here that I think are really going to get fans excited, especially those that favor the more thrashy type of Metallica that was more popular in the 80s. Because like I said, this is definitely a thrash metal album, which, while it does experiment a bit more with some things, throughout the track listing, you do have some of the slower moments like I was talking about before. Thrash fans are still going to find this enjoyable, especially if you could do tracks like Fade to Black or one that also had slower moments in them. You're going to be fine with what's presented here. It's a good album in my opinion. Not my favorite Metallica one by any means, but, for a Metallica album in 2016, I think it's pretty good. And yeah, I think that pretty much sums up my review for this album and my Metallica discography review. Wow, it's been a long time that I've been working on this, and I'm happy to have it done. So, yeah, if I ever review another Metallica album here, of course, if they ever release a new album or, just new content in the form of an EP or something like that, I'll definitely review it here on the channel, so, there's always that to look forward to, I guess. But for now, it's done. Hardwired to Self Destruct, good album. So check it out. And while you're also checking that out, make sure you also check out the playlist that I linked in the description below, where you can check out all my other Metallica reviews, because that would be awesome. And make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on other album reviews and other music-related content, top 10s, discussions, track reviews, things like that. You don't want to miss out on that, trust me. So, yeah, follow me on all social medias in the description also. Comment your thoughts on the project, and stay golden, guys.